Great.
Okay, so just to begin with, I am going to reiterate that this is being recorded. Please be aware of this and know that if you speak or have your camera on, it will be recorded. First things first, I just want to say thank you very much to our two presenters today for taking the time to teach this class. It's something that I happen to find very interesting, and with the German persona, it's definitely something that I can probably make use of. Um, Hopefully all of you guys can too. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is read the SCA harassment and bullying policy. The SCA prohibits harassment and bullying of all individuals and groups. Participants engaging in this behavior are subject to appropriate sanctions. If you're subjected to harassment, bullying, or retaliation, or if you become aware of anyone being harassed or bullied, contact the Seneschal, President of the SCA, or your kingdom's board. With that, I will hand it off to you guys. Thank you again.
Well, thank you for doing all the facilitating.
No problem.
So I'm Galefridus Peregrinus.
And I'm Judith plus Rabbi Mendel.
And we do a lot of our research in languages other than English. And, some years ago, we had a conversation with each other and with a couple of heraldic type folks about how it'd be interesting to teach a class on doing research in languages that one doesn't know. And got a lot of, yes, that would be great. So the reason why we're doing this is that you tend to find lots of stuff that isn't in English. Okay? Or if it is in English, it's in a form of English that isn't written or spoken anymore. And you find out that, oh, there's a reference to this thing, you should really read this, and it hasn't been translated, but everybody references this thing. Now what do I do? No.
And we come from two very different backgrounds. Galefridus learns languages in his sleep. He's really good at picking up the grammar. I'm the person who struggles and struggles. I did not inherit from the rest of my family the gift of tongues, which is what it used to be called, that you were able to speak in other languages with ease. And so I think we can give both those perspectives on struggling with documents that are written in a language you don't know.
So one of the key things that we want people to get, is that you don't have to be a language genius to be able to use these resources.
You have to be a bulldog.
Yes, you have to be a bulldog. You have to, this is not for the faint of heart. Okay, this is challenging stuff. This is not an introductory class. Okay, this is, okay, I've done some initial research and I'm ready to take a deep dive. Okay, we got to state this at the outset.
This isn't Research 101. There are plenty of classes in the SCA that are that.
This is like, junior or senior level class, put it that way. If you're going to put it in the college level type of thing. Because it's advanced techniques and it's advanced methods, but they're very powerful methods and we want people to be able to use them.
Yeah, and they work.
They work. They are highly effective. So why don't you talk about some of the...
well, why don't we start on the fact that we're not going to do
right.
Chinese and Japanese.
So we're not doing languages that don't work with alphabets. So that kind of crosses off the list Chinese and Japanese. I had some fascinating conversations with people who work with those languages as we were preparing to teach this class the first time, and asked them, so how do you go about doing research in these languages? And their description was, yeah, it's really hard. That's mostly what I got from these people. It's very difficult, that there's, many different variations of a particular ideogram in Chinese or Japanese, and you just have to get familiar with it. And just the smallest stroke can completely change the meaning, and it's complicated. It's complicated, and it doesn't work the same way. When you're working with an alphabetic language, things just work differently. Now, you will notice that I did not mention Korean. I did a little bit of poking around just today and found out that Korean has had an alphabet since the 15th century. Now, we haven't included anything Korean in this class, but probably something we might add in the future. Anyway, so that's the thing. We are working with languages with alphabets. So, Roman alphabet, Cyrillic alphabet, Greek, Hebrew, Arabic. We don't do much with the South Asian alphabets, but that's a perfectly legitimate and worthwhile area to explore.
Before we start in on our handout, I want to just talk about the fact that there are a number of different approaches to getting something translated. You found the perfect article, but you've got 5 pages on, making beer, but it's in medieval Finnish. What do you do with that? There's a number of different approaches. One of the ones that we all use is to ask a friend. And this one's actually very expensive because you use up your friends. It's one thing to ask them to do, a page. It's another thing when you hand them 20. And you better be bartering, and bartering hard, because that kind of work takes them a lot of effort. And so you better have something to offer to them and thanks for all the work that they've done. Another place to find help is often Pensic teachers teaching on some subject that you're related to. Or related to what you're interested in. They've probably got some background in those languages or working with those languages. And if you're lucky, you might find yourself part of a team of people doing a project. Right now, Galefridus and I are part of a group called Dining with Lorenzo, which is tackling a Hungarian cookbook written in medieval Hungarian. And while neither of us know that, and we have 3 people on this team who do know how to translate from the Hungarian, they're getting stuck on cooking stuff. But since my area of research is Jewish Passovers from Northern and Eastern Europe, I know a lot about cooking in Eastern Europe. So when they're doing a recipe that puts in some very bizarre instructions, I go, oh, I know exactly what it's talking about. That makes perfect sense. No, of course you put jam in a box. I know exactly what kind of box they're talking about. And so it helps that we can interact with each other and fill in each other's gaps of knowledge.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that the Hungarian translators are not that familiar with medieval Hungarian. Their area of expertise is modern Hungarian, which
it gets you a long way.
It gets you a long ways, but not necessarily all the way.
Right. Which is why when they turn up, put it in a box, they think they've made a mistake.
Yeah.
And then it's helpful to have one of us saying, no, that makes perfect sense. We're going to be talking about stuff and referring to the handout, but the handout is really just examples of things that are types of material that you might find useful. The first page, if you can flip to that, the next page, shows a page out of one of my old dictionaries, just my standard English dictionary I took with me off to college. It lists the alphabet for a whole bunch of languages that don't use the Roman alphabet. And the reason that's useful is that if I'm trying to look up a Hebrew word, I need to know the order of the letters so that I know, putting it into English, that B comes after A. That if I'm looking for M, it's in the middle of the alphabet, so that when I'm hunting for that word in a dictionary, I know the order that the letters are going to come in. And that sounds so basic, but try using a dictionary with another alphabet then when you don't know that and you're completely lost.
Yeah, and this, we just use this as a page to show this thing, but you can, for example, go into Wikipedia and look up alphabet, and it will give you exactly the same information. Just this sort of parallel list of all these different alphabets and the order of the letters and how it works. So this was convenient because it's easy to get it all on a single page. But it's not even the best source, but it is a source so you get an idea of what we're talking about.
Okay. Moving on to the next page. I'm going to talk some about glossaries. You can find them from all kinds of weird sources, but the basic vocabulary in a field, especially if you're specializing in something, may only be 30 to 50 words. If you think of embroidery, for example, you might need the words for thread and knot, stitch, left, right, in, through, cloth, silk, wool, linen. But once you master those basic words, you're going to be able to read a lot just with that basic vocabulary. I've given you several examples here of glossaries. The first one is actually 3 pages from an art book, which is an unusual place to find it, but it came into my hands and I noticed this lovely glossary of French and English clothing terms. And the reason I gave you 3 pages is that the beginning of it talks about just how difficult it is to figure out the meanings of those words. And if that's your field, that's really useful information. If you get past those 3 pages, next one. This is a odd one again. It's French cooking terms. It's intended for people who go on a cruise where they're going to be taught cooking by a French chef. And this is only 2 pages long, but the people who created it really thought that only 2 pages of vocabulary would be enough for you to follow along with these cooks, which is encouraging. It was only 2 pages.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that you'll often come across is that English isn't the only language that things get translated into. So you'll find that in some books, you'll find a glossary that goes from, see, if you go to the next page, you'll see this. That goes from next page. That goes from Arabic, in this case, to Latin or French. Okay. So, all well and good. Arabic, a language I don't know, and Latin, a language that I don't know. But Latin at least uses a Roman alphabet, and I know how to play around with the Roman alphabet. That Arabic alphabet, that one makes me nervous.
So you've got a fighting chance.
You've got a fighting chance. So that's also quite common because there's lots of scholarly works in our game that are in languages other than English, that are translations from other languages other than English.
So if you find it translated into French or Spanish or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. Particularly things that were originally written in Arabic often get translated into the other languages that are common in North Africa, which include Spanish, and French, and possibly Greek, and so on and so forth.
The other thing I do is that I make up my own glossaries. As I work on something, I learn terms, and I've given you a page out of my running glossary on cooking terms. Now, often I'll start a project, get interrupted, real life comes along, and it might be a month till I get back to it. I've forgotten where I was, but I know I looked up that word. I know I spent a day hunting it down. And what did it mean? I don't want to redo that work all over again. And so I keep for myself a list of this is what this word means. And I don't ever intend to pass this on to somebody else, but it's my own work. I've got several glossaries. I've got one for my Jewish research. It's got all these rabbis' names because I want to know if the person being referred to is within period. And if it is, I pay attention to him. And if it isn't, then I can ignore what he wrote. But it can take me a lot of hunting to find that rabbi because the names are getting transliterated out of Hebrew into English, and it gets spelled so differently.
So Rabbi Yitzhak ben Yosef, who's a major authority, might be a 17th or 18th century rabbi, which puts him out of period for Judith's purpose.
Right.
I don't know that there's a Rabbi Yitzhak ben Yosef. I just made that up.
But you get the point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to loop back to using languages you know to get an understanding of languages you don't know. One of the things that's really important is an understanding of word roots. And we barely even think of this, but let's say, let's talk about the word go in English. So I go, you go, he, she, or it goes. Okay. What's the past tense of go? I went. Can you look up the word went in the dictionary? Maybe. Lots of dictionaries will not give you a definition of the word went. They might not even have an entry for the word went. Okay? They might say went, see, go. Okay? So you have to have some kind of familiarity with the way in which the language works. Nowhere is this more important than Semitic languages, where the entire language structure is based on three-letter roots. And by golly, you'd better know the three-letter root that this entire set of words is based on, because that's how you look up the word. You look it up under the three-letter root, not the full word. The Hebrew word for letter, as in like a letter that you write to somebody, is miktav, but the root three-letter root is KTB, koteb. So you would look it up under that KTB. You wouldn't look it up under the Hebrew letter mim for miktav. You'd look it up under the Hebrew letter kaf for kitab. So this is a familiarity with the language and how it works that's important to have if you're going to be doing work in that particular language.
Yeah, it's like in French, you have the third person singular for to do is the word fait, F-A-I-T, but you're going to have to look it up under the infinitive, F-A-I-R-E, in order to find it.
Exactly. So just remember, these rules that we don't even think about in English are part and parcel of how you look up words in other languages as well.
Right.
And you have to have enough of an awareness of that you don't get frustrated in the process. Sentence structure. Be aware that some languages have the same sentence structure as English, and other languages have a very different sentence structure from English. I think in terms of one of the more challenging sentence structures that you can come across if you're unfamiliar with it is German. Where you have like a noun at the beginning of the sentence and a verb at the end of the sentence, and then a really long bit of text in between.
I have the woman in the middle of the street who was wearing a green dress met.
There you go. That is how German sentences work. And those sentences can be like a paragraph long. They can be a page long. And you just sort of, if you're reading German or you're working with German, you just got to say, where's the verb? Where's the verb? I know there's got to be a verb in here somewhere. Be patient, you'll find the verb eventually. So, yeah.
But Romance languages tend to follow English structure.
Yeah, they tend to be very similar to English languages in terms of how they're put together. I've been studying Portuguese for a while because our daughter-in-law is from Brazil, and Portuguese has pretty much the same sentence structure as English. So it's kind of easy to work with in that sense. Except adjectives come after nouns rather than before nouns.
Yeah, French is.
So anyway, so you're.
No, you talked about Romance.
Okay. Also, be aware that there are loan words. So, in culinary Arabic, I'd say about 20% of the names of ingredients are loan words from Persian and maybe some other languages. Because who are the really cool cooks that the medieval Islamic cooks got all their stuff from? The Persians. The Persians really had this high-end cuisine that the medieval Arabs, when they conquered Persia, said, these guys eat well, we're going to start eating the stuff that they eat. So, but they had to grab all the words out of Persian because they didn't have the words for it in Arabic. Yeah.
A really interesting example of a language that used a lot of loan words was the recreation of modern Hebrew. There's a man named Ben Yehuda who moved to Palestine in the late 1800s and discovered that the Jews living there couldn't talk to each other because they all came from different countries. And he decided to modernize Hebrew because that was the language everybody had in common. But what had been preserved over the centuries was the Hebrew that's in the Bible, and that had a limited vocabulary. And so he learned the languages of the surrounding areas. And what he was hunting for was words that Coptic and Egyptian and all those other languages had borrowed from Hebrew. And they had kept those words as people who spoke Hebrew forgot them. So he grabbed them and put them back into his modern Hebrew. And it's a really remarkable thing he did to revitalize the language. He was adamant he wasn't going to make up a word if he could find one.
Yeah. So, odd sources. Okay. So you got the correct page up there.
Right. We're going to talk about a few odd sources that you might find useful. One of the things I struggle with is that my Hebrew is terrible. And so I'm looking for anything that can help me out. This is a page from a Bible concordance. And, Hebrew is an old language. The concordance tells you every word that's used in the Bible. I've given you a page that has to do with wine. And So we translate a word as wine, which has multiple Hebrew words. And this tells you the differences between them. One is, it's talking about something that got pressed out. And another one is talking about a syrup. And another one's talking about young wine. And another one's talking about, and so it gives you the variations so that then when I find those words in a discussion of medieval wines, I'm going to know the differences between them because this source spelled them out for me. Some websites have medieval vocabulary lists. Medievalcookery.com is one. It has a list of cooking terms, especially from Middle English and Old English. Another odd source is that there are verb books. We were just talking about how you can get bogged down in verb forms. There's one called 501 French verbs, 234 Welsh verbs, 426 Icelandic verbs. You can see the theme here. So that if you just go to Google and write book, the language, and verbs, it will pull up all these things. And you know, spending $15 on that book may save you lots of headaches.
All right. Items that have been translated into another non-English language. Now, we touched upon this briefly. Can we go back to the previous page? No, maybe it's the next page.
Next one, previous. No.
No.
What one are you looking for, Lon?
I'm looking for the one.
Lon, here.
No, not that. Looking for this.
Oh. It's way at the end, Lon. You'll get to it.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, it's page 18. It's way
page
at
18,
the,
but
it's way at the end.
we can get to it later.
There it is.
Yeah. So this is a table from a book called the Takwam Asika, which is the basis for another book that's used pretty generally by a lot of folks in our game, called the Tequinum Sanitatis. It's a lovely, the Tequinum Sanitatis is a lovely, marvelous source to use because it has pictures and it shows people doing things and wearing clothes while they're doing things that are just normal clothes for what you would wear while you were working the farm, or while you were cooking in the kitchen, or while you were, sitting by the rose, by
But
the.
it shows somebody roasting an egg.
It shows people just doing stuff, wearing the clothes of the time. In any case, that was translated or was based on this table, this set of tables that talked about all these different ingredients and their humoral values and how this thing is good for people that are of a choleric temperament, but it's not so good for people who are of a phlegmatic temperament.
But that's in Arabic.
But it's in Arabic. Okay.
I can't work in Arabic.
Okay, so let's look at the next page. That's the same page that was in Arabic translated into French.
Yay.
Okay, so maybe you don't know French so well either, but at least you got something that you can work with.
Right. And I'm not fighting the what order does the letter come in.
Yeah. So these are things that you want to be aware of. You want to be making use of. This is under the category of leave no stone unturned. See if you can find your sources in languages other than the original language that might be a language that's easier for you to work with than the original language. Finnish is a hard language to work with. It doesn't have any similarity to the standard Western European languages. It's not a Germanic language. It's not a Romance language. It's not a Slavic language. It gets us into Eastern Europe. It's a completely different language group. But maybe you can find something that was originally written in Finnish and translated into German. Okay, German's tough, but I can work with German.
Right. Finnish is related to Hungarian.
Yeah, Finnish and Hungarian are part of the same language group.
Okay. The next thing I'm going to talk about doesn't have anything in the handout about it. And actually, it's talking about talking. 4 people. Tell them what you're doing research on. Tell everybody what you're doing research on. What you're looking for is somebody to say, oh, I know somebody else who's doing that. And the only way you're going to find those other people doing things connected to your stuff is to make it known what you're poking away at. And those are your people.
Yeah. Yeah. Find your tribe, so to speak.
Right.
You know,
It's a basic research skill. You're looking for people to connect you to other people doing something similar that can help you out with what they've learned and what sources they've figured out. It takes time to build up those connections, so don't expect it to be fast. There are Facebook groups and online, not SCA groups for people in some related subjects. For example, there's SCA Cooks and Medieval Food Lab, but not in the SCA, there are groups called the Bread History Lounge and the Bread History in Practice, and one that I love the name of, Cult of Pre-Pasteurization, Preservation, and Food Preparation.
so
You know?
want to know about pickling food and preserving food back in the day? That's a great group.
Yeah.
They're doing all kinds of crazy experiments, and they're not trying to do historical recreation necessarily, but you learn a tremendous amount from looking at, oh, I decided to do this preservation thing with these vegetables I got out of my garden. And this is what happened. It tastes really good. And you learn from these people.
Right. And especially you learn when you're having failures. Mine isn't working. What am I doing wrong? Another place to look is a website called Stephan's Florilegium. This is not the easiest site to use, because what he's done is to preserve long discussions among SCA groups on a subject. So that, for example, when I started early on in the SCA, I'm a bread baker. Just normally I bake lots of bread for my family. So I wanted to learn how to do sourdough. And I went hunting through the Florilegium for what they had to tell me about how to go about doing it. Because it isn't enough to go to sourdough.com, which gives me modern instructions. I wanted older advice. I wanted to know what was going to work using older methods. Don't just tell me to use pineapple juice, which a lot of modern places will tell you. I want to know what I can use that will work to start my sourdough that would have been available back in the Middle Ages.
And you might be asking, what does this have to do with foreign languages? Well, it's that there are things that people have already done in terms of translating things that you'll find in there. Now, the issue currently with the Florilegium is that the person who is maintaining it is, like many of us, getting old. Like many of us, his health is declining, and he's struggling to keep it up. But still, it's an archive of information that goes back quite a ways.
Right. It's got some really good basic information, and it's useful. A warning I'll give you is that don't overuse those online websites for asking basic questions. You don't want to become known as the person who annoys everybody by asking questions that, oh, we did this 6 months ago. Oh, and here they are back again asking another basic question. So lurk on them and learn a lot before you start.
Yeah, but this is on the one hand, on the other hand sort of thing. There are certain questions that just come up again and again and again. And the oldies on the group, they'll go, oh yeah, they're asking that same question again. But we got to be patient with them and give them an answer.
Yep.
Okay.
Onward. You talk about Google Translate.
Google Translate, yeah. So using Google Translate, what we have here is an effort that I made to use Google Translate to translate a particular olive cure.
Well, first you're going to talk about how Google Translate just works.
Okay. Yeah. Basically, it takes the rules of the language, it takes the words, and it makes its best guess, according to a series of algorithms that, is, between Google and their programmers, and generates, again, best guess.
And they've gotten better.
They've gotten better. This is an old effort. I really ought to try this again and see what happens. But
now go back to the Arabic one.
So going back to the Arabic one. So this is a recipe on a set of instructions on how to cure olives using a particular technique. I ran the Arabic through Google Translate, and okay, there are obviously some words in there that it can't translate, so it just transliterates them. Yeah. So, for example,
the first word.
Yeah, AAJZ, olive victim. Actually, that's the word for take. Take olives, picked. That's what they somehow decided that it was the word for victim. It just means take olives picked in November and in October and November. And let's see, what is it? One thing it doesn't try to do it at all. Just leaves it in Arabic.
Yeah, the end of the first line.
End of the first line. Energy of William. William? I don't know. Time known as Bacardan, whatever that means. Anyway, you can see that it's struggling here. So this happens to be a cookbook that was translated into Spanish. There is a formal scholarly translation of the Arabic into Spanish. So I have the translation from Arabic into Spanish to play around with. So I took that and ran that through Google Translate. And so you see, they hold olives harvested in October, November. Well, that's better than, Aj's olives victim in October, November. Large and small, washed. They put in a jar, oil, and gives additional information. So what I did is I took what I ran through for the Arabic and what I ran through for the Spanish and came up with something that makes sense.
But it's also that you've been studying some Arabic, so that
I know some Arabic. I do not know Spanish, but I have a fair bit of Latin, so I can mess around with Spanish a bit. And one of the things about doing translations is that there's a way in which if you sort of plunk yourself down with the language and start working with it, after a stretch of time, you sort of get in a zone where you kind of just understand what's being said. You can't necessarily write down a good translation. You can say, this is what it's telling me to do. This is what it's talking about. This is what it's describing. But in my experience, and I'm speaking to somebody who's pretty good with languages, it takes me about 45 minutes to an hour of steady work to get to the point where suddenly I'm just sort of looking at something that's in French, for example, a language I've never studied, and suddenly I can sort of understand what's being talked about because I've picked up enough of the vocabulary and enough of the language structures in the past hour to be able to sort out what's going on.
See, he's a language person. That's usually beyond me, but he gets in the zone and can do it.
Yeah.
Okay, you're going to talk about using URLs and a virtual keyboard.
Okay,
Google
so
Translate.
one of the things about Google Translate is that, okay, so you've got your standard keyboard on your computer, which is an English language keyboard, if that's what your primary language is. You might have downloaded some alternative keyboards. So you might have like a Spanish keyboard or a French keyboard that
So you
allows
have the accent.
So you have the accents. You have what are sometimes called the diacritics. So you've got like the tilde that you use in Spanish and Portuguese. You have the acute and grave accents that you use in French and Spanish and Portuguese, and so on and so forth. How does that play out with languages that are using a non-Roman alphabet? Well, you can certainly download a Greek alphabet.
Hebrew's tougher because it goes backwards.
You can you can download a Hebrew keyboard. You can download an Arabic keyboard, but all the letters are in different places. So just because it sounds like R doesn't necessarily mean the Arabic letter Raz for R is in the same place as it is on the Roman keyboard. It's in a different place. So what do? Well, Google Translate helps you get around that by providing a virtual keyboard on the screen. So you can type using that keyboard. You can select the letters using that keyboard. And that enables you to work more with the language with the keyboard you have sitting in front of you. And one of the things that it might do is it might reproduce the keyboard on the screen and tie your keyboard into that keyboard. So as you're typing, it's working with the keyboard that you're seeing on the screen rather than the keyboard you have in front of you. So there are ways of getting around the, oh man, I got to type in this word in Arabic. How am I going to do this? Do I have to select one letter at a time and stick it in there? No,
and I've done that.
Oh, it is excruciating when you have to do that.
It is. Okay. Galefridus showed you his experiments using Google Translate. On page 12, I want to show you one fiasco I had trying to translate from Hebrew. Usually it does pretty well, but this one, and I did this one recently, is so wrong that you cannot rely on this. This is a section from the Shulchan Aruch, which is Jewish law, how to do things. And it's talking about Passover, which of course means you're eating unleavened bread, you're eating matzah. And it came up with this thing that says that if he cannot eat two gazelles together, he will eat the mitzi and then the matzah, and then take a bit of bitter herbs and sink it in the croissant. What in the world does a croissant have to do with Passover? And then it goes on, and dwell in it so that the taste of his bit will not be erased. And for this reason, the chrysanthemum boy must bless him.
What the heck is a chrysanthemum boy?
Yeah, you know that something has gone really wrong. Do not trust it. Go back and find some other way to get this paragraph translated, because Google Translate has failed you. I mean, sometimes it happens.
Yeah. So she eventually figured something out on this one.
I had somebody tell me what it was. But the next page is an example of Google Translate working with modern Hungarian, when what I've got is medieval Hungarian, and it didn't do a bad job. I mean, There are things that you look at and it's a little odd. His quince will fall under the fire and has been perverted, but it really means wizened. But you know, you get an idea. It happened. It gave me enough to work with. It gave me enough to know that the English I was looking at was probably pretty good, and that was what I was trying to double check. Okay, on to side-by-side translations.
Side-by-side translations are marvelous things. So the example that we have here is from Theophilus Presbyter's Essay on Diverse Arts, a marvelous work on a whole bunch of different topics. You know, paints, and I think it talks about glass, a few other things, and a lot of the editions of the Essay on Diverse Arts have the Latin on one page and the English on another page. How many people are familiar with the Loeb Classical Library? You know, maybe get a few thumbs ups or you know, hands raised. You know, people are aware. Are people aware of the Loeb Classical Library, published by Harvard University Press? Okay, I'm getting.
Okay, you better explain it quickly.
Okay, so the Loeb Classical Library, it's a collection of
Spelled
Loeb. Okay, so it is a collection of works of the classics from, you know, the classical period of you know, ancient Greece, Rome, moving forward maybe to about the 7th or 8th century or so, and every page, every work has the original language on one page and an English translation on the next page. So it's a very powerful way of seeing how these languages work together.
The next 2 pages in the handout are an example of, I found a nice side-by-side translation of a Passover ceremony from 1527. But I was suspicious and unsure whether or not the artwork was in the right place or if there were problems with it. So I went back to the Library of Congress, and the next page shows you the original. And what I discovered was that page 37 has some small type at the bottom of it. You see 3 lines of little tiny type? Well, if you flip back and look at the side-by-side translation, it's not on that page. It's not there. There's something wrong. And that tells you that it's probably not translated into English either. If it's missing the Hebrew, it's missing the English. And you need to go poke at it. One thing that's happened recently is that more and more in the field of scholarship, they're working in English. Hallelujah for those of us who are native English speakers. And there are more tools out there. I've given you a page that shows you even how to pronounce it correctly in the Hebrew. We did the next 2 pages in Arabic. We're speeding through so that we finish on this class on time.
So
page 20.
On page 20, you know, 20 and 21. And what we're talking about here are online language resources. This is not a definitive list. There are many other things out there. This is just a sampling. Now, here's the thing. Okay? You have a very powerful resource out there called the Oxford English Dictionary, and we list that in here. The thing that the Oxford English Dictionary does is it traces the history of a word in the English language back to its earliest use that they can find. And then it shows how the meaning of that word evolved over time. That's great for English. But when you're dealing with medieval Spanish or medieval French or medieval German, you need something that's going to give you the same kind of information because the meaning of words and languages changes over time. The problem is that it's not going to give you the meaning of that word, that, let's say, that German word from the 13th century, what that 13th century German word means in modern English. What it'll do is it'll give you what that 13th century German word means in modern German. So a lot of these resources work like that. Okay?
So it's old French into modern French.
It's old German into modern German. It's old Dutch into modern Dutch, and so on and so forth.
But the French one, wasn't that Cardinal Richelieu?
Yeah, that's the fun thing about some of these things is, when you're studying these things, say, okay, the Académie Française, who established the Académie Française to come up with a definitive French language dictionary? Cardinal Richelieu. Yeah, that Cardinal Richelieu. And if you look down the next one, the German Deutsches Wörterbuch von Jacob Grimm und Wilhelm Grimm. Yeah, those Grimm brothers. They were philologists. They were linguists, as well as being folklorists.
So all the old fairy tales they did
It's
related
to their building the English vocabulary.
Okay. The University of Michigan has done a huge project on Middle English. When I was a student there back in the 70s, they were working on it. They were then up to the letter M. They finally finished. So we've given you the link for that. There's also one at the University of Toronto for Old English.
We have links to Russian dictionaries and Spanish dictionaries. The first time we taught this class, by the way, somebody in the class commented, I'm familiar with that Spanish dictionary. That is a hard thing to use. Well, yeah, it is. Because, again, these are resources for language specialists. Okay? Remember, we said at the beginning, this is not for the faint of heart. Okay? You are going to do things that are very challenging indeed.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you end up just struggling to figure out a word. I was doing a project on jams and preserves, and was looking at a recipe that started PAMIERE, and I couldn't figure out what it was making, because I didn't know if it was making something like fruit leather or jam or what. It was not clear, and I had to figure out what that word was because it was going to tell me. And I spent days hunting up variations of it. And finally, one day it came to me, there was a silent L that had been dropped out of it, PALM. And sure enough, that's how I figured it out. But it's not easy. And the final thing in the handout, we've given you links to something called the Lexis of Cloth and Clothing Project, which is sponsored by the University of Manchester in England. We went off to the Leeds International Medieval Congress several years ago and presented there. And they were talking about this project at that point. It's based on the Middle English Dictionary. They've got links there to languages like Manx. You want medieval Manx, you can find it there. So it's really obscure languages and the medieval versions of it. So that seemed like a useful clue, but I have no idea how accurate those are or anything like that, but that's a help. I want to finish by saying something about how the project that somebody does when they try to translate from one language into another, it's really an art. It's a very difficult thing to do because no two languages are identical, and they really are making a good effort. And when we go doing our own translations, it's easy to be critical of somebody else's. There are all these pitfalls from one language to another, and we need to be kind.
We do. And one other thing that I will mention, let's say you're lucky. Everything that you need to do your area of research has been translated. That's wonderful. Okay. The problem is that you're trusting somebody else to have done a decent translation. So again, this is reiterating the not for the faint of heart thing. Sometimes you want to have a copy of the original in the original language so you can look at it. I found this with a recipe. I was looking at a recipe and I said, boy, that looks a little odd what we're being told to do. And I looked at the original Arabic, said, I wonder if it might be that this is what's going on here. That, maybe this one word is mistranslated or there's some difficulty there. So I sent an email to the person that did the translation. And her response was, oh yeah, that's an error. If this ever comes out in the second edition, I'll make sure that's corrected. But yeah, you're right. That's what you're saying that you think it says is really what it does say. Sorry about that. So yeah, I mean, like, if the translator is alive, and you can track them down, oftentimes they'll be delighted to enter into a dialogue with somebody who actually looks at their stuff and is excited enough about it to look at it in the original language and try and sort out why they did what they did. That said, you'll run to some people and say, what, are you questioning what I did?
You're always going to come across jerks.
Yeah, there are plenty of jerks in the world. That is true. So what we'd like to wrap up with on this is with something of a challenge. So we've given you a whole bunch of tools to play around with and a lot of stuff to sort through. So here's a challenge. Pick something that you would find valuable for your research. It's maybe a couple paragraphs or a page or so that's in a language other than English, and translate it. Work on it. This is sort of on the order of the triathlon things that we've been doing. Try this. You don't get good at doing this stuff unless you actually try it and kind of immerse yourself in it for a while. And it's really exciting to start playing around with something in another language and start being able, start seeing what it is that the original author was trying to do and trying to say. Okay? Even when you have it already in translation, it's exciting to see how the thing worked out. So we give that to you as a challenge to play around with. So with that, if there are any questions or people want to talk about their own experiences, we'll stick around for another half hour or so to talk to people.
But I think we can quit the recording at this
But we can
point.
quit the recording at this point, I think.
All right.
Does that work?
Turn it off.